May 7, 1954. A remote valley in northwestern Vietnam. Inside a fortified French military base called Dien Bien Phu, a general picks up a radio and transmits a single message to his commanders in Hanoi.
It is over. We have surrendered.
Nearly 16,000 French soldiers, the pride of one of the greatest military powers on earth, have just been defeated by an army that 10 years earlier did not exist. An army built by a man with no military training, no military academy, no battlefield experience of any kind. A man who, before any of this, was a schoolteacher. His name was Vo Nguyen Giap. He would go on to defeat not one superpower, but two. First France, then the United States of America. He fought for 30 years across 2 wars and never lost either of them. The question military historians still cannot fully answer is how. How does a history teacher with 34 guerrillas and a handful of flintlock rifles build an army that breaks the back of Western military power not once, but twice? The answer starts not on any battlefield. It starts with personal loss so devastating it left him with nothing left to lose. And that made him the most dangerous commander of the 20th century. Vo Nguyen Giap was born on August 25, 1911, in Quang Binh Province in central Vietnam, a country that had been under French colonial rule since the 1880s. His father was a scholar and an ardent nationalist who raised his son to understand clearly what French occupation meant for Vietnamese people. At 14, Giap was already a revolutionary. He joined a youth resistance movement while still a student and was expelled from his prestigious school for organizing student strikes against the French administration. That expulsion launched his career as a journalist, writing articles demanding Vietnamese independence and founding underground newspapers that the French promptly shut down. He studied law at Hanoi University, then became a history teacher at Thong Long College, where he developed a reputation for an encyclopedic knowledge of military campaigns. His particular obsession was Napoleon Bonaparte. He studied Napoleon's tactics with the same intensity a military officer would, annotating his battles, analyzing his strategies, tracing his mistakes. He was preparing himself for something. He just did not know yet what it would look like. In 1938, he married a woman named Nguyen Thi Quang Thai, the daughter of his university dean. They were both committed revolutionaries, working together for the Indochinese Communist Party. They had a daughter. Then in 1939, the French outlawed the Communist Party and began arresting its members. Giap fled to China to link up with the revolutionary leader Ho Chi Minh and seek military support. He left his wife and daughter behind, believing it would be temporary. He was wrong. While he was in China, French police arrested his wife, his sister-in-law, and other family members. His sister-in-law was guillotined by the French. His wife was given a life sentence and died in prison after 3 years. His daughter survived. People who knew Giap said he never got over his wife's death. He never spoke of it publicly. But everyone close to him understood that from that moment forward, the war against France was no longer political for him. It was personal. In December 1944, Ho Chi Minh gave Giap an assignment. He handed him 34 volunteers, men and women, both. Their weapons were a collection of flintlock rifles, a few modern guns, and whatever they could improvise. He told Giap to build the Armed Propaganda Brigade for the liberation of Vietnam. Giap had never commanded soldiers before. He had never fought in a battle. He had no formal military training of any kind. What he had were 10 years of reading every military history book he could find, a mind that thought in strategic systems rather than individual engagements, and an absolute iron certainty about what he was fighting for. He started by doing the one thing larger, better-equipped armies almost never do. He listened to the population. Giap understood that in a guerrilla war against a colonial power, the population is not the backdrop to the conflict. The population is the war. An army that moves through the jungle with the support of every village it passes through is effectively invisible. An army that alienates those villages is already defeated. no matter how many weapons it carries. He drilled this principle into every soldier under his command. Treat civilians with absolute respect. Pay for what you take. Never terrorize. Win the people and you win the war. From those 34 fighters, Giap spent the next 9 years building the Vietnamese People's Army. By 1954, it numbered in the hundreds of thousands and had defeated every French attempt to destroy it. Then came Dien Bien Phu, and Giap pulled off one of the most audacious military operations in modern history. The French military command in 1953 had a plan. They would establish a massive fortified base in a valley in northwestern Vietnam near the Laotian border at a place called Dien Bien Phu. The idea was to use it as bait, luring Giap's army into a conventional battle where French firepower and air support would destroy it once and for all. The French were so confident in this plan that they parachuted over 12,000 of their best soldiers into the valley and built a network of fortified positions they named after women. They had one serious miscalculation. They assumed Giap could not move heavy artillery through the mountains surrounding the valley. He could. Over 3 months, Giap organized 50,000 soldiers and tens of thousands of civilian laborers to disassemble artillery pieces, carry them piece by piece through jungle terrain the French considered impassable, and reassemble them in hidden positions in the hills directly above the French base. The operation was done entirely by hand, in secret, at night. When the French commander General Navarre finally realized what was above him, he sent an urgent message requesting immediate evacuation. It was already too late. On March 13, 1954, Giap opened fire from the hills. The French airstrip was destroyed in the first hours. Supply aircraft could no longer land. The fortified positions, which the French had designed to withstand attack from the valley floor, were being hit from above at angles their defenses could not handle. For 55 days, Giap's forces tightened the ring. French soldiers ran out of ammunition, food, and medicine. Reinforcement attempts failed. The promised air support could not penetrate the anti-aircraft guns Giap had positioned in the hills. On May 7, 1954, Dien Bien Phu fell. Over 11,000 French soldiers surrendered. More than 4,000 had been killed. It was the first time in history that an Asian army had defeated a major Western military force in a decisive, pitched battle. France signed a peace agreement 2 months later. After nearly a century of colonial rule, Vietnam was free. Half of it, at least. The country was divided at the 17th parallel, and a new enemy was already arriving in the south. The United States entered Vietnam gradually, then all at once. By the mid-1960s, there were over 500,000 American soldiers in South Vietnam, backed by the most advanced military technology on Earth. Helicopters that could move troops anywhere in hours. Bombers that could flatten entire areas from 30,000 feet. A military budget that dwarfed anything Giap could put in the field by a factor of hundreds. After the first major engagement with American forces at the Battle of Ia Drang Valley in 1965, Giap sat down and rewrote his entire strategic approach. He had studied Napoleon. He had read Sun Tzu. He now applied the most important lesson from both. Never fight your enemy where they are strongest. American technology owned the sky and the open battlefield. So Giap took his army underground, literally. The tunnel networks beneath South Vietnam, some running for hundreds of miles, became the veins of a war fought in ways American air power could not see and American firepower could not touch. He accepted casualties on a scale that would have destroyed the political will of any Western government. He understood something the American military command fundamentally did not: that in a war of patience between a superpower and a people fighting for their own soil, the superpower always runs out of patience first. The Tet Offensive of January 1968 proved it. Giap coordinated simultaneous attacks on over 100 cities and towns across South Vietnam, including a strike on the American embassy in Saigon. Militarily, most of the attacks were repelled. American and South Vietnamese forces recovered the ground within weeks. But the psychological damage was permanent. Americans watching television saw their government's claim that the war was nearly won explode in real time. Public support collapsed. Political will evaporated. The question stopped being how to win and became how to leave. American forces withdrew in 1973. Saigon fell in 1975. Giap had done it again. Vo Nguyen Giap lived to 102 years old. He died in Hanoi on October 4th, 2013, outlasting every enemy he had ever faced and most of the friends he had fought beside. In his later years, he wrote books on military strategy, gave careful interviews, and watched Vietnam transform from a nation that had spent 30 years at war into one of the fastest-growing economies in Southeast Asia. What do you do with a life like his? He was not a saint. The wars he fought cost Vietnam millions of lives, and the political system he helped install was not the democracy many Vietnamese had hoped liberation would bring. History does not give you the luxury of separating what a man built from what it cost to build it. But the military record stands on its own. He started with 34 fighters and flintlock rifles. He built one of the most effective fighting forces of the 20th century from scratch, without formal training, in the middle of a jungle, while being hunted by the world's most powerful colonial military. He then used that force to defeat France, and then the United States. No other commander in modern history has that record. The teacher from Quang Binh, the man who studied Napoleon's battles in a Hanoi classroom, ultimately became something Napoleon never managed to be: undefeated. He fought two superpowers on his own soil with inferior resources, inferior technology, and no air force to speak of, and he beat both of them. Not because his army was stronger, because his will was longer. Subscribe and tell me in the comments, is Vo Nguyen Giap the most underrated military commander in modern history?